Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for so much for joining today Global Health Café. And we Cambridge Global Health Partnership, we usually organize a Global Health Café every 3 months, and the cafe aims to bring together individuals interested in global health, relevant of experience and professions. It's a kind of informal forum for discussions, sharing, and learning. And today's topic is very interesting topic. It is about healthcare in humanitarian setting. So I'm Ted from Cambridge Global Health Partnerships, and I'm program support from Myanmar program, and I'm going to facilitate and chair tonight event. We are inviting three brilliant speakers, Dr. Saha Asen and Dr. Kai. She is now joining from Burma, and Dr. Shadi. So for the moment, Dr. Saha Asen is not joining yet. I hope that she is able to join very soon. So basically, each speaker has a maximum 20 minutes presentations, and then questions and answer sections will follow. So in question and answer sessions, you can directly ask questions to speakers, or maybe you can comment in the chat box and we will take your questions to speakers. So we aim to finish the event at 7:20, and we would like to request participants to mute yourself during the presentations. So basically, the first speaker is Dr. Saha Asen, but unfortunately, she is not able to join yet. So may I invite Dr. Kine from CPI to give a presentation first. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Siante. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Greeting from Burma, and thank you all for being here. And I'm honored to have opportunity to share with you today about healthcare in humanitarian section in Myanmar. So my name is Kai Wei U. I'm working as a program management writer at Community Partner International. Next slide, please. So from my today presentation, I will try my best to give a little sense of what has happened and how we have responded and what step we need to consider for the humanitarian response. Next slide, please. So let me introduce first about my organization, Community Partner International, CPI. So my organization, CPI, is a US-based INGO, and it was founded in 1998. We aim to empower the vulnerable community in Asia to meet their essential health, humanitarian, and development needs. We started the operation in Myanmar first, and now we have expanded other Asia regions such as Bangladesh, Thailand, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan to support the community. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. So firstly, I would like to talk about some background about my country, Burma. So being one of the most ethnically diverse country in Asia, Burma suffered the longest internal ethnic conflict event in the modern time. So military ruled the country since 1962 to 2011, and there were two quasi-civilian government terms between 2011 and 2021. And the military coup happened in February last year, February 2021. So in the map here, the shaded area represent the conflict-affected area in my country. As a result of long-standing civil war, 25% of population live below national poverty line. For several decades, people in the ethnic conflict-affected area were in need of basic health services. Moreover, the country health system is fragile and fragmented, and there is 74% of out-of-pocket payment in my country. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of the healthcare system in Burma, and here I would like to emphasize the role of ethnic health organization, which is our organization is currently working together with this EHU in order to provide the healthcare services in the ethnic conflict affected area in Burma. So right now, EHU in this map, you can see like EHU is the one of the key stakeholder in the healthcare system in Burma. Next slide, please. So I want to explain a little more detail about the ethnic health organization. So due to the decade of conflict, the ethnic community in conflict-affected area started to establish an informal or parallel health service delivery system for their own community. So these organizations are referred as an ethnic health organization, and they are closely and loosely affiliated with the ethnic group and the ethnic authority in the conflict-affected area. So the formal health system from central government couldn't reach to those community, and it is not accepted by the local community. So therefore, the EHU became the key health service provider for the basic health services in the conflict setting for the past several decades. Next slide, please. And I will continue to talk about how health system became after military coups. So unfortunately, all of you might be aware that like Myanmar military seized the power in February 2021. And right now, it has been more than 1 year since the coup in Myanmar. During this period, we have seen the widespread protests, conflict, violence, and instability that has triggered to a humanitarian crisis. And as you will have seen in the news, that country is now experiencing mass demonstration, civil disobedience, and brutal crackdown. And internet shutdown and media repression is happening right now in Myanmar. And many of the government staff and the staff from the banking sector has been on strike. So it leads to the paralysis of the government services and the banking system. Moreover, there is a widespread violence and the escalation of the conflict with ethnic armed organization and the local people defense forces in many areas throughout the country right now. So next slide, please. Since the coup, a member of the medical profession has been at the forefront of the anti-military protests and the national strikes of the public worker known as civil disobedience movement. In retaliation, the military occupied medical buildings and hunted down, arrested, and imprisoned the health worker. Many thousands who joined the CDM, civil disobedience movement, are still refusing to cooperate with the military. So the public health system has almost completely collapsed. And as a result of this, most government hospital and health services are barely operational during this moment. Next slide, please. And I will present about the COVID-19 pandemic situation that we faced before and after coup. So for Myanmar, first COVID-19 cases was identified in March 2020. And despite the shortcoming of the health system at that time, the country was able to minimize the consequences due to the COVID-19. So at that time, the civilian government responded pandemic situation in the whole of society and whole of government approach. And the government, ministry, private sector actor, and civil society work harmoniously to respond to COVID-19 pandemic. And COVID-19 vaccination program was launched in January 2021. So I can say that although we had limited resources at that time, by the leadership of the civilian government, we can overcome the COVID-19 first and second wave, and the magnitude of those two waves in Myanmar were relatively small at that time. Next slide, please. But sadly, after the February military coup, many people refused to get the vaccination from the military government due to lack of trust. And in mid-2021, only a small percentage of the country population has completed vaccination, and the immunity of the people in Myanmar against COVID-19 is pretty low. Therefore, the new Delta variant spread as the third wave, and it was much faster than the previous COVID-19 variants. And the two factors like a low immunity and the new variant reinforce each other, and that leads to a very rapid surge of the COVID third wave in my country. And even with the underreporting and limited capacity of the lab facility across the country at that time, we saw the positivity rate is around 20 to 40%. during the COVID third wave. Again, this was the underestimated figure because of the shortage of human resource in the public health facility due to the current political situation. Next slide, please. And unlike the first and second wave, during the peak of the third wave, public hospitals couldn't accommodate increasing number of patients, and the authorities set a lengthy and complex process to get the hospitalized if you are sick. So people naturally inclined to the home-based care. And what we have seen on the ground at that time was totally heartbreaking, and families are desperately seeking the oxygen and care for their loved one. In this photo, you can see people are queues to get the oxygen, and people have had to treat at home rather than in the public facility. So next slide, please. And people are also dying in their home and in the street, and we can estimate how many lives was lost in just a few months. So those are what we are facing during the COVID third wave after the coup. Next slide. And apart from the COVID crisis, we also face the humanitarian crisis throughout the country after coup. And as I mentioned in the beginning, as our country is one of the most ethnically diverse countries, the longest internal ethnic conflict happened for more than decades. But after the decade of fighting, some of the ethnic armed group has signed the nationwide ceasefire agreement, NCA, to be enabling to participate in the political talks. And some groups has negotiated for the bilateral ceasefire agreement after 2012. But the coup, February 2021, February coup has killed off any remaining hope of peace talk, which was moving ahead. And the coup is the biggest shakeup of the Myanmar conflict landscape. Since the coup, there are widespread violence and the escalation of the conflict with the ethnic armed groups and the local people defense forces in many areas across the country. And you can see in the map about the violence across country 6 months before and after the coup. Next slide, please. As a result of the widespread violence and the conflict across the country, and extreme humanitarian crisis within and beyond the country border has escalated since the beginning of 2021. So according to the UNHCR March 2022 data, there are estimated over 500,000 people displaced internally, and over 33,000 people have to flee to the neighboring countries such as Thailand and India. And according to the UN OCHA Humanitarian Needs Overview 2022, 14.4 million people are in needs of the humanitarian assistance, including health, food, education, and the protection, etc. Next slide, please. So let me continue to present about how our organization, CPI, responded to those crises. So in terms of COVID response, CPI started to think about what we can really do in this horrible situation. And if we look at the spectrum of the illness, the COVID third wave, the new variants still follow the pattern of the severity as the previous variants, although it spreads much faster than the dose. With that in mind, we plan to target 80 to 90% of the patient with the COVID-19 who will be categorized as the mild, moderate, and the severe cases. For those cases, we will need to provide the visit clinical care, oxygen therapy, and the medicine and commodity to relieve suffering and to mitigate the progression of the disease. So at the same time, we are also aware of our limitation in the current situation, such as the security concern, particularly harassment by the security force, and limited human resource and availability of the medicine and the supply in the market. And from the aspect of our strength, we have also an extensive network of partnership with the CPU and CSO and the EHO. And we also implement as the agile operation system, which can respond to the urgency rapidly. And our previous experience with first and second wave response is also one of the strengths for our organization to respond to that wave together with our partner. So next slide, please. As well as the COVID-19 response, we are also working to sustain the other health and humanitarian services in the COVID-19 sensitive wave. And we work together with our partner EHO and CSO to provide the humanitarian assistance to the conflict-affected IDP population. Next slide, please. So what we can learn from our experience. So I can say like it is very difficult to see all the progress of the previous decade. And then prior to the coup, we were actively engaged in the effort to get in the universal health coverage in Myanmar, and also did a lot of coordination and the collaboration between ethnic health organization and the public health system. Now that seems like a very distant memory. However, some of the urgent needs should be met. So here I would like to offer a few thoughts based on our experience for the humanitarian response during the crisis situation. First, our implementation model. Walking through the partnership with the local organization has proved to be a valid now more than ever. During the challenging and the crisis time, without the contribution from the local partner, we won't be able to reach people in need on the ground. Secondly, we believe that our approach in our capacity development and empowering local community pay off at this critical juncture. And thirdly, active engagement and participation of the community play a key role in the response to the crisis situation. Without that engaged community or people-centered approach, none of our effort will be effective. And finally, the humanitarian assistance need in Myanmar will be the greater. So it is critical to retain the international community support to Myanmar, especially in this darkest time of the country history. Next slide, please. So before the end of my presentation, I want to raise the 5 issues that we are facing right now to be aware about the global health issue. The first one is the health as a human right. So now the country, the state is lack of its responsibility, and we need to think as a health as a human right. And everyone has the right to get and receive the health services, and the health worker should be protected. And the second issue is that related to the COVID-19. So now in my country now, many population in the ethnic area, which are bordering with the other country, do not still get a single dose of COVID-19 vaccine. And it will be challenging to control for the future COVID-19 wave. And the third one is the immunization program. So right now, like a childhood immunization program seems to be suspended for a year due to the multiple reasons, such as a security reason, limited human resource, and the financial resource. And it will be the consequences in the regional level for the long run, and prone to happen the outbreak of the vaccine preventable disease in the very near future. And the fourth one is the disruption of the healthcare services, especially for the 3 disease, HIV, TB, and malaria, and it can make the drug resistant issue in the near very future. And the last but not the least, there will be the additional burden on the health system of the nearby country due to the displaced population. So as conclusion, I would like to request that our country, Myanmar, needs special attention by the global community in order to provide and respond healthcare services in the humanitarian setting. So this is the end of my presentation, and thank you very much, and thank for your kind attention. So over back to Siatet.
Thank you, Dr. Kai, and your presentation is very comprehensive and very informative, and it can tell that the whole pictures of the health situations in Burma, and everybody can get the informations and knowledge from your Dr. Kai presentation. Thank you so much. May I invite Dr. Shardy to present about the FACEFORWARD partnership programs. Thank you.
Just to check, can you see the right screen? You're not seeing presenter view. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. It's always good to do stuff with Cambridge Global Health Partnership, and I feel inadequate amongst the other speakers. So I hope that I can tell you about what we're doing and get you sort of on board with FACEFORWARD. I've put a QR code and you'll see that on the whole screen, and I'm going to shamelessly say that if you put your phone camera on that QR code, you will be directed to our Just Giving page. So I'm going to shamelessly say £5 will go a long way, and we're very happy. So what I wanted to do is just sort of the overview of the talk. I'm going to talk a bit about an introduction to myself and my work in global health, and then a bit about FACEFORWARD. First of all, the background, then the country itself. Jordan is where it's going to be initially based from, what work we've done so far, and then we're going to go through a case, and then talk about the sort of next steps that we want to do to take it forward. And can't really sort of do any of this without Mr. Vijay Santhanam, who is the senior clinician and lead on the whole FACEFORWARD and all of our work with CGHP. And I also want to thank him for allowing me to present a lot of his cases in the slides. So the first thing to say is I am sorry if some of the pictures are a bit gruesome. We are facial surgeons, and I've tried not to put too many, but there are some that are a bit, I don't know, a bit, maybe a bit too much for those who aren't medically trained. And then the other thing is just as a small point, I've realized from working in global health that politics affects our sort of work, because that's normally why we're in a region, but it's important for us to stay apolitical. So, you know, we are apolitical. We treat anyone, and if I give the impression that I have a political opinion, I assure you I don't. I'm just here to sort of treat the people and help them. So a background onto myself, sort of I graduated from University of Bristol, first in dentistry, and then I did a couple of years as a sort of junior dentist in oral and maxillofacial surgery in the northwest of the country. And then it was probably about 2009 during dental school, I decided that I want to do oral and maxillofacial surgery, which requires you to do dentistry and medicine. And then I was fortunate enough to come to Cambridge to do medicine in 2014. And then I sort of stayed here ever since. And it's important to note that, you know, whilst I was at medical school and doing my foundation years, I still worked as a MaxFax. So I actually have been working maxillofacial surgery since about 2012. But in 2020, I was lucky enough to secure a national training number, and God knows when they'll deem me suitable enough to come off and become a consultant. But along my pathway, I got some global health experience. So in Bristol, I did a bit of work in Cairo with an orphanage, but my biggest placement was in the States, where I went to Washington, DC for a month. And I learned a lot from America, but the biggest take home was, you know, we want to criticize their healthcare and they want to criticize our healthcare, but the actual fact is it's not too dissimilar. Patients get good care in both places. And then my second experience in global health, or second big one, was whilst I was at the University of Cambridge. I went with CGHP to Botswana, and with Mr. Santhanam and his team to Botswana to do a maxillofacial elective. And I really got sucked into the CGHP mottos of mutual learning between the partners, and also a sustainable partnership that, whilst it focuses on the local needs, is a win-win-win partnership where the local medical team win and get something out of it. We get something out of it for going there, and obviously we do it because of the local population. And I really bought into that, because I always hated the kind of overseas global health where you go to a country and take a picture for Instagram, but actually don't do anything else. But at the same time, I make no shame in saying that as a trainee, I gained a lot from going to Botswana. And the reason why I say that is because it's important for other trainees to appreciate that, because they too should be looking to get involved. So just if I go along quickly, this is a case we saw in Botswana. This is a young boy who broke his jaw, never had it fixed properly, and couldn't open his mouth bigger than that. So he was on a liquid diet. And I saw Mr. Santhanam take a rib graft and reconstruct his jaw joint. And then the nice thing about that is, subsequent to that, the Botswana team were able to do 3 without the UK team. And then as a trainee, this is still the only case I've ever seen. And because it's quite rare in the UK, but we're gonna, you know, I'm told that there's an upcoming case in Edinburgh. So had I not gone to Botswana, I wouldn't have seen that. And had we not gone to Botswana, the team there wouldn't have been able to be exposed to it, and the child wouldn't have been able to get a great outcome. And then subsequent to that, I've recently been appointed on the Global Health Committee for the Royal College of Surgeons. So I'm making a serious commitment. It's a 3-year thing. and I'm now on the Royal College of Surgeons committee to try and navigate how they're going to policy the future of global health training. And for me, what I'd like to see is that a lot more shared collaboration and acceptance of experience that you might obtain abroad. Because right now, if you're not trained in England, they won't really be interested, or UK, sorry, they're not interested in what you've done. Anyway, so then we talk about FACEFORWARD, which is our new project with CGHP. And the background probably came about from a double reflective process. So the first reflection I had is on my sort of what I experienced and saw about refugees. And the second reflection is about the work we do in the privileged area on the face and working with people's appearance and function. And then from that sort of probably grew the FACEFORWARD. So what I want to do is talk to you a bit about refugees and my reflections on that, and then also about what work we do in Cambridge and how they came together. So these are two refugees who are close to my heart. They're my grandparents, and I never realized they were refugees or appreciated they were refugees until I was about 25, when I read my granddad's memoirs. And I think the reason why I never realized that is because they were fortunate enough to be able to make a good life for themselves and provide for their family. And they grew up very happy. And this is him enjoying a well-deserved cigar in Monaco. But then around 2015 onwards, you start to see a lot of negative press around refugees. This is a particular one that sticks to mind, where they focus on men, who are different to us. They're brown and they're coming in and creating crime. And this was used to kind of push a nationalist agenda against supporting refugees. And this is a news article that I remember very clearly watching and taking a bit of offense to.
How many refugees has Poland taken?
0.
And you're proud of that?
If you are asking me, if you're asking me about Muslims illegal immigration, none, not even one will come to Poland. Not even one if it's illegal.
And I don't need to play the whole thing. You get the gist. But essentially, it's not isolated to that political party or that country. But essentially, they're not refugees anymore. They're illegal immigrants. They're coming to create problem. And then I remembered very clearly we did a sociology course in the University of Cambridge whilst I was at medicine. I remember sort of this thing of the idea of secondary deviant and labeling theory, which is essentially people who are deemed deviant and labeled that way will then internalize their new identity and act out accordingly. So if you label someone as something, it becomes very difficult for them to forget their past and move on, or not even forget, but try and move on and build a new life. And that's something that, again, bring it back to my grandparents, who I never heard them talk about hating any individual, even though they're both born in a war-torn location. So then moving away from refugees and looking at the work we do in Cambridge, we work in a privileged site, which is the face, and that houses all of our senses. We use it to see, speak, eat, and breathe. But a function that shouldn't be overlooked is aesthetics. And the face is a very visual part, and it's how everyone else sees us. And there's good data that those with facial disfigurement are perceived to be less attractive. And whilst that's obvious, the data also shows that people perceive them to be dumber, less honest, less friendly, and more violent. And in the context of refugees in the Middle East, which have been a war-torn area, someone with facial scars is considered to be involved in all the conflicts. So it can be very difficult for them to move on. But in Cambridge, through sort of surgical skill and technology, we're able to address not only their function, but their aesthetic appearance, and allow them to integrate well with society and get on with their life. And that's in no small part due to these, in part due to these 3D printers that were kindly provided to us by the ACT Charitable Trust, or Addenbrooke's Charitable Trust. And what we're able to do is print life-size body parts to then plan our surgery, or to even construct custom-made implants onto them. So if I go through a case very quickly, and I apologize if, like I said, about the gory nature, but this is a gentleman who had a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the face, and you can see all of his jaw and a significant soft tissue injury. The principles are resuscitate, save the life, and do your best to put it all together. And this was a plate we did using our 3D printer, but it's not a definitive job, and you can see it starting to come out. But with new technology, what we can do in Cambridge is get a good CT image, copy the healthy side over, and then get this person a custom-made titanium implant. And it tells us exactly where to screw the hole. It's a bit like IKEA surgery. And then you take that into the patient. And what we did here, what Mr. Santhanam did, was put the titanium, got a bone graft from his hip and wrapped it around. And then at the end, it's in situ like that. And the patient, considering what they started with, has a very neutral appearance with a few soft tissue scars, but actually they can get on with their life. So then, bringing those two together, we wanted to apply it to global health, and you know, we felt that Jordan was the best place to do so. This is a picture taken from the British government website, and it's because I know a lot of people are a bit scared about traveling to the Middle East, but all in green is where the government says it's safe to travel. And it was only the corner with Syria during the Syria civil war where people advised against it. So that's one of the reasons. Jordan is a safe and stable country that has not seen war, but is surrounded by areas that unfortunately have seen conflict. It is an upper middle income country. These are all UN statistics, with a high human development index and an advanced healthcare system, at least in the capital. There's good universities, with the University of Jordan having good research output. But the problem is here. There's over 750,000 refugees from 57 nationalities. The UN does not include any Palestinian refugee for various reasons, mainly political. But if you include them, there's over 2 million Palestinian refugees in addition to the 760,000. Officially, it's the second largest refugee hotspot per capita. If you include the Palestinians, it's by far the first. But looking at the 750,000 alone, there's about a $50 million deficit to address their health needs. But we had to convince people to come to Jordan, and Jordan's a beautiful country. And what we wanted to do is tell everyone from Cambridge and around that, you know, if you come, if you haven't been already, do go there. Petra, Wadi Rum, and also all their seas are beautiful. But away from the beauty, the reality is there's also these refugee camps where they're essentially shanty towns filled with predominantly children who've known no difference in their life. And this picture highlights it well. They're all always smiley, but you can see that they've got a lot of disease. And here, this is demonstrating the high rates of tooth decay. So if I wrap up what we've done so far and finish it up. So the work we've done so far, like everything during COVID, has been COVIDed. This is my favorite word. It was hijacked by the COVID pandemic. And we wanted to be a lot further on, but unfortunately, as with many things, we got COVIDed. But we still did some good progress. We've got links with the Sir Bobby Charlton Foundation, and they have a branch in Jordan that deals with rehab following ballistic trauma. Medical aid for Palestinians are finding us a lot of people that we can help. And more recently, Gift of Life International, which deals with open heart surgery for children, have a very active in Jordan, and they're kind enough to allow us to use a lot of their networking and links to get us a easier and less sort of stressful transition into work in Jordan. We've put together a team. This is Akram, who's the head of the charity with the Sir Bobby Charlton Foundation. Naveen is our clinical psychologist, which I'll talk about later. And then we've got two surgeons, both annoyingly called Zaid, and both you cannot find a picture of them without scrubbed up for theatre. So dedication, as all good surgeons have. And we're starting to find a hospital. The Khalidi is a big private hospital, which has agreed to allow us to provide surgery there. And the importance about a private hospital is that we didn't want to be taking care away from the state services, and we also didn't want to be anywhere where there's an emergency admission, so that we can be a bit more certain that our surgeries will go ahead. Through working with the local partners, we can get images taken of the patients and sent over to us to Cambridge, where we can then construct any prostheses or reconstruction as needed. And for our first trip, we've come to the target of 12,500, which will cover 5 major procedures under general anesthetic, as well as a lot of local, but we're focusing on the 5 major. And we want to allow space for teething errors, which pun intended, but we know that there's going to be some learning, a degree of learning first time we go, so we're going to keep it only to 5 operations. And like we said, we've already started finding patients, and we want to make sure that the work we do is not just pretty pictures that we can come show on a slide. We want to know that we're doing good work. And how do we do that? In the UK, there's a very well validated quality of life questionnaire, which we use for various things, including head and neck cancer and craniofacial problems. And University of Cairo has translated this to Arabic. And what, you know, if there's any other speakers, especially of Farsi or any other language, 57 nationalities, they don't all speak Arabic, but we will, that is the majority. And we've already started seeing patients. So our local surgeons started examining them, compiling a report, and then we have been holding multidisciplinary Zoom meetings where we discuss the next stage. So to talk about what we're going to be mainly dealing with is trauma, because there's a lot of road traffic accidents and a lot of the refugees have fled war-torn areas. Majority of the facial trauma is in civilians, about 70% is in civilians, and about 50% of that trauma occurs on the face. And that's what we're going to focus on, but there's also an increase in cleft lip and palate incidents thought to be due to secondary to chemical warfare, and there's also an increase in head and neck cancer risk, and there's a lot of dental decay. So we can easily treat the dental decay on the local. We're also dentists, so we could take out teeth, but we're going to focus mainly on the trauma. And I want to show you one case. This is Majid, who's a young gentleman who was living in Syria, and unfortunately his building was the target of a missile, and this is what he was left with afterwards. So this is his chin at the bottom, eyes up there, and then the local surgeons are able to do what they're probably better than us at doing, because they're in a war. They're able to resuscitate and put together the face as best they can, and you know, after all of that, even inside the mouth, he had a fracture which they were able to plate. You can see where the fracture is, where the missing teeth are. And essentially, this is what he was left with. Now, the difficulty is you can't live life like that. And he did try, and there are different organizations that tried to address him. And I won't go to exact issues with it, but he had multiple, and I mean around 50 operations to try and reconstruct his nose in various countries, with the majority being in northern Israel. And they just couldn't get a decent reconstruction. And you can see this around his neck is actually pre-COVID always covering his face. So he walks around with a bandana. So can we do any good for this patient? Well, we've given him, you know, the clinical psychologist Naveen has sat with him, and we feel that there are parameters that we can improve. And do we have experience in doing it? We don't see that much missiles to the face, but what we do see is cancer. And this is a patient in Addenbrooke's who, because of cancer, we had to cut out his nose. So a similar style defect. And then what we can do is actually use our lab to create a prosthesis. And I'm sure if you sat down with our labs, because this patient was done about 8 years ago, they'll tell you that new technologies and materials are even better than this. But I'm sure that Majid would agree that he would be happier with that. So the next steps really is to get on a plane. So we want to go for a scouting trip to meet all of our local partners and finalize the final bits with regards to the hospitals and where we're going to get CT scans and what the logistics are and getting our licenses sorted. And then anyone who knows me knows that I love EPIC, which is the multi-million-pound hospital record system in Cambridge. So as a charity, we can't afford that, but luckily there's something called Open EMR, which is a free-to-use medical records system, and we're in the process of setting that up so that the team in Jordan, when we're not there, can keep contemporaneous notes that we can access from Cambridge for our multidisciplinary meetings. And also, when we go there, we can write our operative notes and keep a true record of all our patients. And we're hoping that the first patient we treat will be before we see 2023. So thank you very much for your time. And I'll stop my screen share.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shadi, for your presentation. It's a brilliant project, and it can bring back the people to normal life as much as you can. So let me invite the third speaker, Dr. Sahar Asens, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I am going to do a screen share with my presentation. I can just pull that up. I'm sorry, I'm in Magdalen and our internet hasn't really supported me in trying to send this. So I'm now just going to share it. So if you could bear with me. I'm going to try and definitely do my best. But the speakers that we've had so far have been incredible. So what I am going to speak about today is, whilst I get this up, is about my experiences in Syria, but I am going to focus on what I have been doing recently, which is working on Ukraine. So here's my share screen. How do I... there we go. I think this is the one. My apologies. I do apologize for this. I can't seem to get my screen up. Are you able to see? So you're seeing my rather busy desktop, but I can't seem to play the
you can see your presentation, Celia.
Can you see it as a whole, or I can only
sort of
see
half
it
of
as
it.
Yeah, that I need to, I don't know how to fix that. Let me try again.
I think if you zoom out at the top, it's currently on 54%. So if you maybe reduce that a little bit.
If you just stop the screen share, click play, and then come back to Zoom and share just the screen that's full view.
Okay, I'll try that now. It's bizarre. It's doing something very strange. I might just talk it through. New share. No. Oh dear me. I've had gremlins with this last night. Doing exactly the same thing. Let me try one more time, because it's still now I can't seem to get out of this. Let me quit. And maybe we'll have to. Here we go. Right. Are you able to see that?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. My apologies. Let's try again. I will start again. I'll try again, because it looks like it's, how about that?
Okay.
Yeah, won't let me play it, because I tell you why, because the thing is, the bar is at the top. There we go. Apologies, we're there. I'm very sorry about this. So what I'm going to speak today is about Ukraine, actually, and lessons from Syria. So at the moment, I am a PhD student currently working on a PhD project at the University of Cambridge, looking at the impact of attacks against healthcare in armed conflict. And this is a PhD that has come about from working in various countries where I have gone from feeling rather safe with the Geneva Conventions to now feeling very unsafe on the ground where I'm working. So just to recap, I'm ex-military. I was in the British Army prior to medicine. I was a non-medical support officer. I used to command a troop of soldiers, and I wore the red armband, the Red Cross on my uniform, because I was part of the RAMC as a non-medical support officer. That was during the Balkans, and we were operating as a field ambulance within a larger field unit, operating and working with ease of access and no challenges. Fast forward to when I left the army to retrain to be a doctor, and I went to work in Palestine during the Intifada, the second Intifada. And it took me a few moments to realize I was there, I was filming. I have a background in making films as well. I was filming, but I was also with medics, clearly marked with a red cross on their uniform. I was standing with them, and we were getting shot at. It was clearly a medical team, and it took me a while to work out that they were actually directing their shots at us. And that sowed in me, and it was only a few years apart, it sowed in me a seed about, where the Geneva Conventions, all the international instruments that are there to protect us, they're great on paper, but do they work in theory? And I continued to work in different areas, combining working in emergency medicine in the UK with time spent overseas. I worked in Libya for a year during the war there. Again, the same sort of concerns about medical neutrality, about ease of access, about us as a medical unit being able to maneuver, and patients being able to get to us. We fast forward by a year, and it was time to go to Syria because clearly things had escalated in Syria with the advent of the war there. And almost from the beginning, the tactic was different. From there, from colleagues, I was hearing almost immediately that their hospitals were being hit. It's a bit like here in the UK, for some reason, we are at war. And on the first or second or third day, within the first week, Adam Brooks has been hit. Other big major hospitals have been hit, right from the start. I could not help but have my military mindset there, thinking, gosh, this feels like a strategy. And it was a strategy. And over years of learning and researching, it has come to pass that there were people who were practicing this new military strategy of weaponizing healthcare. There are reasons why they do that. It's because it demoralizes the opposing fighting force. It also reduces the number of people or the facilities that can look after wounded opposition fighters, and it also makes an area untenable to live in for the local population, especially if the population are not in line with, say, for example, their government, as we saw in Syria. So for myself, I started to investigate and look at the impact of attacks against healthcare in armed conflict. I did an LLM, a master's in international human rights and humanitarian law, because I really wanted to understand what these instruments were that were supposed to protect us, but really weren't doing it. It was a brilliant year of study, but possibly one of the most depressing that I've ever been through, because it was great in theory, all these mighty instruments, all the different protocols, all the Genevans, a whole load of other mighty words and law that has been developed since the 1800s, actually. And yet on the ground, it means nothing when you are being targeted in that way. I remember standing on the border in Syria in 2013, watching on the Turkish-Syrian border, watching a row of ambulances. Clearly they were ambulances being painted black, so that they were black vehicles, unidentifiable when they crossed over the border. And it just brought back that notion of when I was in a military unit, medical, in the 90s, in 97 in Bosnia, ease of access. So anyway, that's where we are now. And what you're seeing a picture here is in 2013, and it wasn't just hospitals, it was schools. Schools and hospitals were suffering the brunt of attacks. And here we have two people that I was with. We were making a panorama at the time. I was working in a nearby hospital. This is a hospital in an area called Kubra, and we were in a makeshift kind of hospital. And what you see here is the aftermath of a Soviet-made thermal bomb having been dropped on a school. 28 children were severely burned, suffered horrific injuries. 3 died instantly. A number of them died from their injuries a few days later. We worked within the emergency room of the hospital with basics. I mean, it definitely wasn't the level of input and emergency care that I would and my colleagues would have given in our hospitals here in the UK. I was working in London at the time, and it was, you know, it was harrowing and it was traumatic, and it was, you know, what we could do at the time was only to stabilize and then transfer out to Turkey. So the patients had to endure a rather painful long journey from where we were on the outskirts of Aleppo to the Turkish border, where they were picked up by a form of medicine that you and I and the audience will recognize. It was developed, you know, appropriate level equipment in ambulances were being used to take these patients. So that vision of what you saw from the moment the patient was brought to the border, the Syrian and Turkish border, where they were in whatever moved, a car, a truck, an empty van, anything that they could get to transfer the patient to the border. And these were children who had suffered horrific burns. And then on the other side of the border were ambulances lined up from the Turkish side, that were equipped, critical care ambulances. Some of them were critical care level, some of them were you know, the normal standard ambulances, but super well equipped. It was like the medicine that we would all recognize, and that, I've never forgotten that image. And Syria would have had that itself, had pre-war they would have had that itself. Syria was developing really well with its own health infrastructure, meeting lots of WHO goals prior to the war. But after the war, had started, that ended. Now, the thing that I do want to talk about, yes, that's Syria, and that was the team. So what you can see there is Ian Pannell, the correspondent, trying to find his words to articulate what he is witnessing. And Darren Conway, who has his back to us, who is an epic BBC cameraman who's currently in Ukraine at the moment. And there they are trying to sort of find the words and the images to depict that horror. Things, I think, become softer in their impact when you see them through, you know, a screen, but you know what it is in real life of the place, the heat, that the ground was still hot from the bomb 2 to 3 days later. What I do want to talk about, though, is what is happening now. Syria was enabled to do a lot of what it did because it had an alliance with the Russian government, with Putin. So there was an alliance, and I have spoken about this, and this is my research. Essentially, my research is looking at Ukraine and Syria and the impact of attacks against healthcare that it has suffered from a common perpetrator, i.e., the Syrian government and the Russian government military. Quite clearly, there's been close collaboration. So as I watched, like the rest of us, we watched the war in Ukraine begin, I waited for the moment it was going to be imminent in days before Syria voiced its support, and it did. Whilst the rest of the world, the majority of the rest of the world, not everywhere, but the majority of the world were condemning the invasion of sovereign territory, Putin was getting support from Prasad, and agreement being made about troops going from Syria to support the Ukrainian invasion. What we also know from 2015, when Russia did formally engage and come into the battle in Syria, had, again, I say this as a former army officer, since 2015, an excellent opportunity to go on an operational rise, where they were able to test all their weaponry, their jets, old and new, also make a fair bit from the Syrian engagement. So made a lot of money, tested all their equipment, got their troops ready, and obviously then they were fighting fit, or maybe not so fighting fit, for Ukraine. What I want to show here also is a little clip. I'm not sure if it will come, I will try it, but this is a little clip that shows Russian jets. An incredible investigation was done by the New York Times depicting the moment Russian jets actually find their target and how they release their load.
This is Russian radio
Yeah,
traffic.
we can't see anything.
An Air Force pilot on a bombing
I will
mission
stop
over
that
Syria.
then.
But if you possibly put the
that's-
link in the chat, people might be able to watch it in their own
okay.
time.
Yeah, that's a shame. Okay, so I will come back to my presentation. What that actually shows, and I would highly recommend everyone having a look at that here, it's here, is it's the New York Times incredible investigation that was able to get pilot recordings flying over Syria and how they conduct their operations. And you see, what you didn't see is actually the Russian pilot stating that he is on target, and when he drops the bomb actually drops on a hospital. In fact, it's not even an overground hospital, it's an underground hospital. So what this demonstrates is that the attacks are perpetual and done with planning. So that was that. What I will say here now, moving on to Ukraine, I have basically not gone to Ukraine right now because there were other things to do. And it's not about going for yourself. It's about going if you are asked, or if there is something you can do that is concrete. For everywhere that I have gone, I have been invited. Yes, with UCASCs, about other things that they needed first. And that's what I've responded to. What they wanted to do was medical colleagues wanted to speak to the world. They wanted to have their voices heard. So this is how I contributed. I contributed by writing their words in a journal that was important to them, that they felt they could reach out to their medical colleagues. So I began by writing a series of articles for The Lancet. I'm very grateful for The Lancet for accommodating this space to get the words of Ukrainian doctors and healthcare workers and what they've been enduring out to the world, to the medical community. I began by this one. It was about Ukrainian doctors mobilizing in the first few days of the war, and within the body of this we hear about Peter who has to regroup and redeploy from his normal job to working within the A&E section of the hospital, things that he hasn't done since medical school, and he was redeploying. Within the article, we learned that during his night shift, his main task was actually up to 7 times taking patients complete with everything, that the paraphernalia, the drips, everything else, the life-saving drugs that they may well need on standby, up to 7 times in one night. Why? Because their hospital was there was fear that their hospital was coming under attack. The sirens were going off. Bombs were landing exceptionally closely. So that was Peter. The next one, it was an opportunity to speak to a pediatric doctor, pediatric anaesthetist, who spoke about the horrors of trying to get access to a baby that was born with respiratory problems, a young boy, and they weren't able to get this baby to a NICU, a neonatal intensive care unit. So through a process of telemedicine, constant monitoring, they were able to keep the baby stable, but critically ill, stable, who would need definitive care within an intensive care unit. Finally, they did manage, after a week, to get the baby to the unit. And what they did do, and this was by the time we did the 3rd article, when I spoke to the doctor, and she came on for the 3rd time, she had the biggest, hugest, happiest smile, because they had finally managed to get this baby to a NICU. And what it had involved was quite a hefty operation. For a journey that normally pre-war would have taken less than an hour, it had taken in excess of 5, because her team had to navigate up to 17 checkpoints. And with every single checkpoint, they had to put their hands up in the air, wave a white flag, and just be super, super calm at every single checkpoint, because, as she describes, the checkpoints are really, really, you never know how it's going to turn out. She has good experience of this, because on the 2nd day of the invasion, she describes an incident that shocked them all and made them realize what the reality of the situation is. She was working in the ops room, deploying ambulances to go and pack up patients. One farmer had driven over a landmine and was quite severely injured. She deployed her ambulance team to go and get and retrieve the patient. They retrieved the patient. They were driving through a field. They were driving on a road separated by 2 fields. In the fields were tanks. To their disbelief, they started to get shot at by the tanks. The paramedic calling the ops room. The ops room are hearing everything going on. Bearing in mind, this is only day 2 of the invasion, before we hear about such things in the rest of the world. So it had started on day 2. The ambulances hit and burst into flames. The driver is killed. The patient is killed. The paramedic who was on the phone is badly burnt. They were able to, an ops room, it's like us, for example, with our own ambulances going around, and suddenly we know that they're being targeted and hit. That's how it was. Utter disbelief. And ever since then, they've been super, the way that they manage things now is that she describes that the way that they monitor ambulances right now is by watching the GPS, the little dot that they make across the screen from the moment they deploy to the moment they come back safely. And eyes are on, and that's how it works. Very, very, very quickly, I know I'm going over. So what was the other practical thing that they wanted? Well, this is something we did in Addenbrooke's. I'm really, really pleased to say that one of the things that they needed, and we learned this from Myanmar as well, is training videos. Training videos, very, very important, because some of the things, like I said, the surgeon redeploying into areas that he'd never worked in before, having to remember skills that he'd maybe learned as a medical student. So what we did was have a filming day in Addenbrooke's with the staff, an incredible day supported by Anglia Ruskin University film students. We filmed a whole series of medical films. They're now being cut and edited and will soon be uploaded online to support our Ukrainian colleagues. The other final thing we did to show solidarity. So this is a letter that's been signed by 27 international emergency medicine colleges that was published in the Lancet, published in print yesterday, condemning attacks against healthcare. And I think that's the other thing we must keep doing. And my research is on that, but speaking with one voice about condemning attacks against healthcare. They've happened in Syria, they're happening in Myanmar, and they're happening in Ukraine, and they're happening in North Ethiopia as well, and elsewhere. Finally, we are working to respond with, again, because everything is so personal, everything is person to person, we're speaking to people on the ground in Ukraine. Lists of what they need are coming. I know things are getting coordinated through bigger agencies, but essentially, bottom line is not everything is getting through to those that need it. So we found another way, a little bit more direct, and we're working with established people on the ground who can get essential equipment distributed throughout Ukraine. So this is an organization that is part of World Extreme Medicine. We've set up Medex for Ukraine. We are fundraising. We've had a successful delivery already done inside Ukraine. We did this over the weekend. Equipment has been delivered and it's being used right now. And that's great. And my final words that I want to say before I leave you is a quote. Again, it's all about the voices from the people on the ground. So Peter, remember the oncologist that I spoke to you about, who was talking to me from the first week of the invasion. I asked him if he's scared, because clearly this is a game changer now. As a medical professional, you are not safe. Are you scared? And he basically said, these words. He says that he invokes the memory of a Russian surgeon called Fyodor Uglov, of the Soviet Union, also of the Heart of the Surgeon. This surgeon actually carried on practicing way into soldiers during the siege of Leningrad. During an operation, a shell hit the hospital where he was working, and it removed an entire wall of the operating theatre. What did he do? Peter told me the surgeon continued to operate to save a person's life, risking his own. He admitted that he he is scared. He's scared for a whole number of things, for his family, for the guys who are heroically fighting for us, for the country, for Ukraine. But we look for positives. We have not had such unity of the nation as we have had now for a long time. So I know that I have probably overrun. I'm going to stop screen sharing and try to come back to you, but how. There we go. But yes, that with the screen share, but the message is healthcare.
Thank you, Dr. Saha. Thank you for your presentations, and your presentations also remind me my country situations as well, especially in the humanitarians and conflict setting. Healthcare professionals have a lot of challenges and a lot of pressures. They are also in the danger as well. So as far as I remember, nearly more than 30 doctors, healthcare professionals in my country were already killed, and more than 200 healthcare professionals were arrested by military. So it also reminds me my country situation. So now we are commencing the question and answer sessions, and you can unmute yourself, and you can also ask questions directly to speakers. We still have 15 to 20 minutes for questions and answer sessions. Thank you.
I think there is one question in the chat already that was posted earlier to Dr. Kine from Madison.
Dr. Kine, there's a question for you. One of the participants asked you about the medical schools and hospitals. The participant is asking about, did they also close local hospitals or attack them besides occupying them? It has to contribute to the amount of people that lack basic healthcare. That's the questions from participant.
Thank you. Thank you, Madison, for your question. Right after the coup, the military took over some of the public hospital, and they took over to make as a station for them. So this has happened in some of the urban area, but for the rural area, and especially for the ethnic area, due to the conflict and the fighting, most of the facility, including the healthcare facility and the school, are burned down, and in some area the military attacked with the airstrike, and the airstrike make the facility on the ground to be the burned down. So it makes it makes the people to access the healthcare services from that area. And another thing is that due to, as in my presentation, I also mentioned about the civil disobedience movement. So most of the health workforce are there in the civil disobedience movement, and it's also there are the very limited number of the healthcare worker who work in the public hospital right now. So it also makes the limited accessible of the basic health services to the community during this moment. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Kine. Is there any questions from participant? Please feel free to ask the questions to our speakers. We have a very brilliant speakers.
There's just been one popped in the chat. Can you see it?
Dr. Arsons, this is questions to you. The participant is asking, can you comment on access to medicine for IDP?
So I think, when our convoy went to Lviv and crossed over to the Polish-Ukrainian border, what they saw actually, and it was interesting, when Shadi showed the video clip of how refugees were being viewed in the years gone by in some of the neighboring countries to Ukraine, for example, but for refugees from elsewhere, the response has been very different. And this is very noticeable by those of us that have worked for in places with Syrian refugees, with Libyan refugees, with just refugees basically fleeing conflict. That's who they are. The setup in Poland right now is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. There's anything and everything that a refugee could want other than their own home. And what it has done is set up the blueprint of how it should be for everyone who is faced with this horror. And I think in terms of access to medicine for IDPs, that's if you live for internally displaced, I think, frankly, it's across the board for anyone and everyone who is inside Ukraine right now. Lviv is separate, more on the western side, is more stable, but in the rest of Ukraine, access to medication is challenging. The big things that are lacking, that have come out time and time again, we are being asked about, are things like insulin, metformin. All diabetics right now are having a really challenging time. Also those who require thyroxine. Those are the two medications. The non-communicable diseases, chronic disease that people live with, those supplies are impacted, they're short, and that's a real worry, because something that is perfectly manageable to live with are now becoming exacerbated without access to adequate care. We're still get medications inside that would be pretty straightforward to get access to otherwise. So it is a challenge. It's a big worry.
Thank you, Dr. Sahar. There's another questions and to all three speakers. The questions is about what help can a non-medic provide in these settings? So this is a questions to all three speakers who would like to answer.
Yeah, I'll start. I don't think you have to be a doctor or a medic to help. I think you realize how insignificant you are as a doctor in a failing system when you go work in a system that doesn't have all the other support that we normally have. You can do the best operation in the world, but if the patient doesn't have basic sanitation, it's going to fail. So you don't have to be a doctor to get involved. You don't have to be a medic to get involved. I think that, maybe I'm a bit shameless in asking for donations, because I know without money, nothing happens. But actually, when we go out to Jordan, we need people of all sorts. And even, so talk about, I think Katie Cooper mentioned about non-communicable diseases and prevention. Even education and sort of being trained to communicate and how to train people to look after their health better is easy, and that doesn't have to be medically trained. But definitely speaking about it, if you're sort of thinking about how to help, speaking about it, sharing the links. If you fancy running a marathon or whatever you do for fun, think about some of the sort of maybe charities you've seen today, but also get involved and see if there's a way that you can actually come and help on the ground, because most of the time you can.
So follow by echoing that. I agree definitely on the position of, sometimes when you're there, you feel pretty useless because you can't everything that I would have wanted to do and what I would have been expected of me to do under normal circumstances. It was very challenging to deliver because we didn't have the equipment. We didn't even, managing severe burns with little more than paracetamol was heartbreaking. But what we were eyewitnesses to this, especially in the advent of fake news, because frankly, when I spoke out about that incident, I was then almost immediately, within a day, accused of making it all up. And, you know, if you feel like you want to, it's all over the internet that correctly tell you that we didn't. Sadly enough, it happened. But, you know, for non-medics, you know, I would ask for you to really be sure of what you're hearing and look beyond something that claims to be fake, because that hurt not me, it hurt those that had suffered a huge amount, that they were being accused of, you know, that what they suffered didn't happen for those that survived. So I would ask that for people to really, really be careful about where you get your information from, and ask questions, and then from that you can advocate. Advocacy is a really strong thing. For me personally, with this work of attacks against healthcare, it's, you know, joining in that voice to condemn that wherever it is happening. So I would ask that. So advocacy is huge. So that is a very important way to get involved.
Thank you. The last questions is going to Dr. Shadi.
I can see it. I've read it. So Maria asking about host-refugee tensions. Essentially, in Jordan, we wanted to initially only address refugee health needs because we didn't, you know, they have a good healthcare actually. We didn't want to tread on toes, and we didn't want to offend anyone local by saying that, oh, we're coming from Cambridge and having to do operation. In actual fact, a lot of the charities sort of said that if we exclude Jordanians, it might be more difficult to get support, to get medical licensing to work in the countries and to do that. So we've kind of switched it. My focus, where basically I didn't want to offend any locals, and I didn't want to sort of be seen to be like someone coming from the West and showing them how it's done. So we decided that we will treat any child and any refugee and Jordanians who don't otherwise have access to the care. But the majority will be refugees. But when we first started, we said we definitely won't do it. And then with regards to government pushback, I don't know if you know much about the government politics in Jordan. It's quite safe and good, but the, you know, Queen of Jordan is ethnically Palestinian, and she has to be quite careful about supporting Palestinian refugees with finances, because then it can be seen that can be a bit of pushback. So we're not asking anyone for money, and we're not going to any government buildings for various reasons, mainly because they're already overwhelmed. So we're going to private, and it's important because in the UK we think of private as, you know, flat screen TV and a quicker service. But what I mean by private is it's not owned by the government. Sometimes they're, you know, not made, you know, they're non-profit private, or they are private and for profit, but reasonable prices for us. So it doesn't matter where we do it as long as it's safe for the patient, but we do not want to go in government hospitals.
Thank you, Shadi. And I think now we are already at 7:30. So it's already 10 minutes over as a plan. So it's time to finish today Global Health Café. And thank you so much, our speakers, and thank you so much, our participants, for joining today Global Health Café. And before finishing Global Health Café, let me announce that we will have a next cafe on 21st June to discuss antimicrobial stewardships, and you are also invited to join as well. So wishing you have a good night and see you again in next Global Health Cafe. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.